Quick notice. What's up with it? You absolutely beautiful legends. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but we just hit 5K subs, and I gotta say, it's surreal. Huge thanks for rocking with me, watching, liking, and dropping comments. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to grow with you all. As usual, you know the drill. Pucker those lips and kiss any mommy or poppy you see after watching this video. Don't worry, just tell them NotNPC sent you. They'll definitely understand. Anyway, on to the video. This time, the two Chadlets decided to be the first in the fray. Lunging forward, they charged straight at the mature fishman. Gina, in particular, was blinded by battle lust, causing her to speed way ahead of Dova. Noticing this, the blonde baddie called out to her, warning her to be careful. Gina, however, completely ignored her. She doubled her speed, appearing before the fishman in seconds. The ugly brute, enraged by her challenge, cocked its hand back, unleashing a devastating claw strike on the bouncy mommy. Gina, having anticipated the attack, swiftly leaped up, narrowly dodging the brutal blow. Capitalizing on the opening from the fishman's wild swing, Gina attacked with her eagle claw skill, sinking the phantom claws into the bastard's back. This motherfucker, however, was built different. It easily shrugged off Gina's lethal move and countered with another claw strike. Caught off guard by the unexpected counter, Gina froze in shock, a second too late to evade. At that desperate moment, Dova came in clutch, slashing away the fishman's ugly claws. She comboed this move with a stab attack, driving her blade deep into the kid fishman's stomach. The mature fishman, witnessing the fall of its brother, bellowed in rage, shifting its fury to Dova. Taking advantage of the fishman's mournful bellows, Gina immediately jumped back, putting distance between herself and the fiend. Although her assist might seem goated and her face didn't show it, Dova was currently sweating bullets. She'd intended to slash off the fishman's arm with that attack, but the resilient bastard easily shrugged it off, sustaining only a shallow wound from her all-out strike. Noticing this, Dova couldn't help but get a sickening feeling in her gut. This bastard fish was trouble. As if to prove her right, the fishman lunged forward, instantly closing the distance between them. Dova, caught off guard by the absurd speed, froze in surprise, unable to react. With a desperate look, she watched helplessly as the claw slashed at her, threatening to cleave her in two. However, Dova wasn't alone in this fight. Gina immediately jumped in, saving the blonde diva from the devastating attack. Now free from the fishman's clutches, the petty mommy immediately threw shade at Dova. What was all that bullshit she was saying about being careful? Without her, she'd be dead for sure. Dova, feeling embarrassed, replied that she'd let her guard down. She hadn't expected the ugly fish to move with such freakish speed. Gina, however, didn't relent with her mockery. Flashing Dova a side boob, she let the blonde baddie know that they were now even. A life for a life. She should consider this save as payment for saving her earlier. Dova, taken aback by the petty babe, glanced at her incredulously. Didn't she see the big bad fish seeking to clap them both? Was now really the time to talk about debts? All in all, they should definitely lock in, as this catfish-looking motherfucker was hella strong, and judging by the situation in the other battlefields, they shouldn't count on the boys for help. Gina, also noticing the boys' perilous situation, locked the fuck in. It seemed it was up to them to save themselves. Addressing Dova, Gina let her know the fishman wasn't as daunting as she'd believed. Sure, its speed was absurd, and its strength was crazy, but it wasn't to a point where they couldn't do anything about it. If they were careful, they should be able to take it down. Dova, however, didn't share her optimism. She warily stared at the fiend, reminding Gina not to get cocky. For now, they should just buy time and keep their distance. With that, the plan was set, and the two baddies immediately jumped into action. Gina was to flank the fiend from the top, drawing its attention as much as possible, and Dova was to act as their main damage dealer. Hopefully, that would be enough to stall for time until the big poppy Jeong arrived. Speaking of the big daddy, Jeong was currently facing off against two mature fishmen. Although most would find the situation horrifying, our boy was chill as hell. He even had time to assess the other battlefields. From his understanding of the squad, Dwayne should be enough to handle the mature fishmen. The girls, however, were a problem. Unless Gina could distract the fishmen with her bouncy plot, chances were that they'd definitely need help. He should probably finish things off quickly and get his ass over there pronto. Acting on this thought, Jeong immediately charged for the fishman, his bone blade at the ready. The ugly bastards, also eager for blood, lunged forward, their battle lust brimming. Jeong, acting quickly, zoomed past the first fishman, slashing its arm off in the process. The second fishman, capitalizing on Jeong's opening, swung at him, its ghostly claws inching for his face. Not fazed by the attack, Jeong swiftly channeled his electric shock, leaping over the brutal blow. Now with a direct shot at the fiend, our boy immediately sprang forward, plunging his bone blade deep into the bastard's neck. With that done, he swiftly backflipped, putting distance between himself and the fishman. The fishmen, eager for a lick back, resumed their wild charge, their focus solely on Jeong. Our boy, vexed by the resilient motherfuckers, took a second to analyze them. Their agility, strength, and reaction speed were way better than the trash kid fishmen. It was almost like they weren't of the same species. However, if the mature ones were already this strong, then just how formidable would the elderly fishman be? He couldn't help but shudder at the thought. Deciding to ignore the daunting thought for now, Jeong briskly launched his lightning blast attack, frying the shit out of the charging fishman. He comboed this with a diagonal slash, cleaving the fried bastard in two. Done with the first foe, our boy immediately turned his attention to the next. The fishman, consumed by rage, wielded its severed arm, using it as a makeshift club. With the arm club in tow, it swung at Jeong, sputtering its putrid blood across the forest floor. Our boy, backpedaling from the bastard's slam attack, landed on a nearby tree. Using the wooden bastard as a ramp, he swiftly parkoured off its trunk, springing straight for the fishman. Before it could react, Jeong blitzed past it, decapitating the fiend in the process. With that, our boy skidded to a stop, having ended his share of the foes. We switched to Dwayne, who had apparently off-screened his share of the prey. Despite this glorious feat, the gentle Chad was currently cursing the fishmen. Because of them, he'd ended up ruining his trusty pickaxe, the very first gift he'd received from his boo Jeong. As the two Chads were still taking in their respective battlegrounds, a shrill scream sounded, drawing their attention. Turning quickly, the Chads realized in horror that Gina had been caught by the fishmen, her future looking hella bleak. Jeong, dreading the ominous development, immediately sprang into action. Buffing his throw with the electric shock skill, he yeeted the knife forward, landing a vicious blow on the fishman's arm. Capitalizing on this short respite, he lunged forward, determined to save Gina. There was still time. He could definitely save her. The fishman, however, had other plans. It completely ignored the wound on its arm, slamming the mommy forward. Our boy, still determined to save her, watched in horror as Gina flew, crashing brutally against the ground. Blood sputtered in the wake of the blow, and all that was left of the mommy was a severed foot, still dripping with her blood. Damn. The scene then zooms in on the rest of Gina's mangled body. The bouncy mommy, clearly having seen better days, lay broken and beaten on the desolate forest ground, her blood pooling beneath her. We know her condition is terrible, as even the pervy artist didn't bother to draw her bouncy plot, meaning shit was real. However, despite her desperate condition, she wasn't dead just yet. Barely. Gina still drew breath. Jeong, also aware of this, made a wild charge toward the fallen baddie. He plowed through the intercepting fishmen with ease, leaving decapitated heads and electrocuted corpses wherever he passed. Before Gina completely croaked, he was determined to make it to her. Using the potion rewards from the last room, there was still a chance she could be saved. Until that possibility was exhausted, he was resolved to rescue her and get her to the next room no matter the cost. Dova, also in her own mad dash, had her momentum halted by a sudden ambush of fishmen. No matter how many of the bastards she put down, more always came to fill their numbers, a fact that greatly enraged her. Deciding to stop fucking around, Dova activated her secret move, Hair Whip. This was a skill that channeled the essence of the Papi Jiraiya, morphing Dova's hair into lethal whips of mass destruction. With her Medusa-type shit activated, Dova launched her whips forward, targeting the fishmen before her. The whip attacks proved brutal, lashing and shredding the fishmen's bodies into pieces. The little fiends fell like dominoes, helpless against the bizarre attack and their bloody demise. We switched to the Chad Dwayne. Our boy, also desperate to save Gina, shoulder bashed the shit out of the fishmen, sending their pathetic bodies flying. Wherever he passed through, mangled corpses of fishmen fell, all of them brutalized beyond recognition. However, despite his charging speed and overwhelming momentum, he just wasn't fast enough to make it to Gina in time. From the looks of it, the bastard fishman would finish her off before he got to her. True to his fears, the mature fishman made its move. It had long realized Gina wasn't completely dead, a fact it was determined to rectify. With its arm cocked backward, it prepared to land the decisive punch on the unconscious Gina. Jeong, however, wasn't going to let this happen. He tripled his charge, instantly closing the gap between himself and the fishman. Acting swiftly, he slashed off the fishman's arm, beautifully thwarting the threat to Jina's life. Dwayne, finally catching up, comboed Jeong's slash with a brutal punch, sending the bastard fishman reeling. The blow proved powerful enough to launch it far into the distance, causing it to crash pathetically into a tree trunk. Our boy, not relenting, immediately pressed the attack. He knew better than anyone not to let his guard down until the enemy was confirmed dead, so until the fiend croaked out its soul, he wouldn't stop attacking. Acting on this, Jeong lunged at the fishman, seeking to split the motherfucker in half. To his surprise, however, the fishman had a nasty trump card stowed. Caught completely off guard, Jeong received a savage blow, forcing him to backtrack. Dwayne, puzzled by Jeong suddenly retreating, asked what was going on. Jeong replied that he'd messed up. He'd failed to predict the fishman's limb regeneration, causing him to fall for the fishman's counterattack. He couldn't blame himself, though, as this was an ability the fishman shouldn't have. Or at least, it was an ability they didn't have in the last regression. Casting a concerned gaze at the fishman, Jeong couldn't help but get a bad feeling about it. Something was definitely off. As if proving him right, the fishman bellowed, suddenly descending into madness. Dwayne, naively believing this was an opportunity, immediately lunged for the fishman, planning to take it down while it was still in a frenzy. Despite Jeong's cautioning calls, the giant Chad ignored him, instead closing the distance between himself and the frenzied fiend. With the fishman in attack range, Dwayne swiftly unleashed his hammering skill, delivering a barrage of blows on the fishman's flank. The punches worked at first, slowly wearing the fishman down. However, that didn't last long, as soon loud clanging sounds rang out, almost as if Dwayne was punching solid steel. Being the first to pick up on this, Dwayne's face instantly paled, a foreboding feeling creeping into him. Although he really didn't want to, the giant Chad reluctantly craned his neck up, seeking to figure out what was going on. To his horror, the fishman had undergone a bizarre transformation, its body morphing into a shark-like behemoth. Flashing a mocking grin, the fishman taunted Dwayne, asking if he was done with his weak-ass punches. Dwayne, taken aback by the unexpected development, froze in confusion. From the fishman's bulging muscles and taut body, it was safe to say he was cooked. Jeong, watching all of this from the sidelines, paled in horror. The fishman's new form was something he'd recognize even in his sleep. However, that begged the question, just how did the bastard fiend complete the dreadful transformation into a middle-aged fishman? That wasn't supposed to happen, not according to his recollection at least. Deciding to mull it over later, Jeong made a beeline toward Dwayne. If he didn't immediately intervene, then Dwayne could very well die. Back to the fishman and Dwayne. The transformed fishman, still flashing its mocking grin, laughed at the stunned Dwayne. It relished the fact that it now towered over the puny Dwayne, a fact it readily boasted about, calling him short. Before the bastard fish could spout any more nonsense, Dova came to Dwayne's rescue, launching her hair whip at the fishman. This attack, however, proved to be doo-doo, as the whips futilely bounced off the fishman's skin, doing 0 damage. Jeong, taking advantage of the fishman's distraction, spawned beside the fiend, his electric blast at the ready. Wasting no time, he immediately launched the attack, frying the fishman's head with the currents. Capitalizing on this effect, he stabbed at the bastard's eye. Sure, its skin was tough, but could the same be said about its eyes? Well, there was only one way to find out. The bastard fish, however, instantly responded. It casually dodged Jeong's stab and retaliated with a backhand punch, yeeting our boy back. Jeong, left reeling from the blow, used the momentum to pull himself and Dwayne from the fiend's clutches. Even if he had to nurse his injuries, he'd obviously save his boo first. Noticing their backpedaling, the fishman immediately pressed the attack. Like hell, it would let them recover. With a mighty leap, it lunged at the boys. Jeong braced himself for the inevitable impact, his bone blade at the ready. The attack, however, proved to be a feint, as the fishman's target was never them to begin with. Rather, something behind them. Turning around, Jeong realized in horror that the true target was the unconscious Jina. With their faces laced with sweat and dread, the squad watched helplessly as the fishman landed a brutal punch on Jina, nailing the unconscious baddie to the ground. Jina's body spasmed in the wake of the attack, almost as if it was desperately trying to cling to life. That, however, didn't last long, and it soon grew limp, falling lifelessly to the ground. The bastard fishman, ecstatic about its murder, laughed haughtily as it stared at the fallen Jina. It taunted the squad, drawing their attention to the listless face of the baddie. In its mocking tone, it provoked them, asking how it felt to lose a comrade and be helpless about it. Did they feel pain? Sadness? Despair? Whatever it was, they should show it more so it could relish their sorrow. Jeong stared daggers at the perverted fucker, barely keeping his rage in check. To him, Jina's death was both too tragic and vain to let it go. If the mommy had died on her feet, maybe while battling a monster, then he wouldn't be so fazed by it, as that was the nature of L.A.G. But to die while unconscious, and so vainly at that? That wasn't something he'd so easily let slide. The bastard fishman, oblivious to the MC's chaotic thoughts, continued its yappery. It asked the squad if they were feeling the despair, the vanity of it all. Well, they shouldn't worry, as it would quickly send them off to meet their beloved and bouncy mommy. Jeong, having had enough of its asshole monologue, led the charge to eradicate the fiend. He instructed Dwayne to join him in the frontal assault. As for Dova, the blonde Barbie was to flank the bastard from the back, hopefully digging one of her whip tentacles up its hateful ass. With that, the squad engaged the fishman in a desperate melee, each side resolute to claim the other's life. As the Chad Murphy said, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Well, the Poppy Murphy was goddamn right, as when the camera zooms out of the intense fight, we get a glimpse of a mysterious figure camping on a nearby tree, watching the squad duke it out with the fishman like an uninvolved spectator. This mysterious figure was the hateful asshole, face so ugly even his mama wouldn't love it, Liam, the bastard. The same asshole who killed Anji in the previous chapters. The hateful fucker, still donning his signature cocky grin, mocked the squad for squirming so much when he was just chilling, leisurely enjoying the fight. As he'd thought, watching others fight on his behalf was indeed a fun thing. Man, fuck this dude. Before I lose my shit in rage, let's turn back time by a couple of hours, back to when Jeong was telling the squad about his private attribute. Turns out while the squad was having that discussion, Liam was already present in the room, stealthily eavesdropping on their conversation. He'd overheard everything Jeong said, including details on his attribute and what to expect from the fishman. Armed with that info, the treacherous bastard pointed his finger rifle at Jeong, ready to blow his brains out. As he saw it, though Jeong's ability was useful, the bad blood between them was irreconcilable, and a fight would inevitably break out if they met again. If that was the case, then it was better to end him here, when he had the drop on him. After giving it much thought, he reluctantly lowered his arm. Sure, he wanted the bastard dead, but if he did that, then he'd have to fight the other three, and that wasn't a wise move, especially since he didn't know the kind of skills they possessed. It was better to stay hidden and watch for now. Maybe a juicy opening would pop up, and he'd use that moment to end Jeong. Anyway, that's exactly what he did, and that's what led us here. To him camping up the tree like a cod creep and the squad desperately fighting for their survival. Liam, calmly watching the battle, reflected on Jeong's information. If he was remembering correctly, then once a single fishman was left, it would inevitably morph into an elderly fishman. Using his life detector skill, he quickly scanned the room, trying to determine just how many fishmen were alive in the space. His scan hinted at 3 groups of creatures being alive in the room. The first was the humans, of which there were currently 4 alive. The next was the fishmen, with 2 being alive. And lastly was a mysterious being. But he chose not to focus on it as it wasn't human nor fishman. What was of importance to him was that there were currently 2 fishmen alive. The first was the bastard the squad was currently fighting, and the other was the fishman he'd captured earlier just in case. All in all, with the fishman in his arms, he had complete control of the situation. He could choose to kill it at any time to awaken the elderly fishman in the other fishman and conveniently fuck Jeong over in the process. He got bricked just thinking about it. Oh, how he longed to see Jeong's face of despair when shit suddenly hit the fan. It was bound to be an interesting sight. For now, though, he would bide his time, waiting patiently for the best opportunity to give them the highest degree of fuck. We switch back to the squad. After an agonizing duel, they finally managed to tie the fiend down. Dova with her Medusa-type shit, and Dwayne with his Hercules-type shit. With the combined effort of the two, an opening was made for the big Poppy Jeong to finally end the fishy bastard. Our boy, not one to disappoint, immediately charged his electric bone blade, slashing savagely at the fiend. Faced with the behemoth's resilient skin, our boy channeled the power of mommies, buffing his attacks by 10 times. With the phantom support of all the fallen maidens, he finally slashed through the fishman's tough skin, cleaving the hateful fucker in 2. Watching the behemoth drop listlessly to the ground, Jeong couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, this peaceful moment quickly fled as a loud bang sounded in the background, drawing Jeong's attention. Our boy, donning a severe expression, immediately identified it as the sound of the finger rifle skill. Even though he'd only heard it vaguely, like hell he'd forget the very skill that took away one of his baddies. That was definitely the sound of the finger rifle. However, the shot wasn't fired in their direction, so who or what was the intended target? This didn't stay a mystery for long, as soon Dwayne and Dova's restless shuffling drew his attention, forcing Jeong to turn around. Upon doing this, Jeong watched in terror as the fishman spasmed, seemingly undergoing another transformation. Our boy, already dreading the development, gazed somberly at the transformed fiend, his face a mess of fear and despair. I couldn't blame him though, as before them was the newly transformed fishman, a mysterious blend of monkey, pufferfish, and maybe leopard-like being. An ugly bastard, to say the least. Predictably, Jeong dropped a deuce in his pants. Whatever Lag was playing at, he just didn't want to hear it, because honestly, what the hell was this crap? Dwayne, equally as spooked, turned to Jeong for answers. He was sure there were still other fishmen alive, so how was the elderly fishman already manifested? Jeong replied, cautioning him to lower his voice. He told the squad that someone was deliberately sabotaging them, and that someone was probably hidden in the trees behind them. He warned them to be careful, as that mysterious fucker probably had a long-range shooting skill, which made him very dangerous. As they discussed, the elderly fishman got bored of waiting and decided to make its move. Dova, noticing this, immediately responded, throwing her hair whip, aiming to trap the fiend. Jeong, however, shouted at the reckless bitch to stop. Seriously, after all they'd been through, didn't she learn anything about Lag? Whoever acted recklessly would be the first to die. Unfortunately, his warning came too late, as the fishman easily yeeted Dova's hair, trapping the baddie in its hands. Dova, in an oh shit moment, finally realized the error of her ways. She'd done fucked up. The fishman, capitalizing on the situation, immediately yanked the baddie forward. Like hell it would miss out on such an opportunity. Dova, however, wasn't going down without a fight. She firmly planted her feet on the ground, doing her best to resist. Their desperate tangle soon turned into a tug of war, but it was clear that Dova was slowly losing. Even with her killer head game, this wasn't a fight she could win. Jeong, realizing this, immediately spawned beside her. If the fishman was using her hair to trap her, then he could simply chop off the tentacle bastards. The fishman, however, wasn't going to let this happen. It tripled its force, yanking the hair with all its might. Dova resisted for a bit, but that didn't last long. Soon, her worldview changed, and a sickening weightlessness overshadowed her other senses. It wasn't until she could see her own bloody neck that she realized something had gone horribly wrong. Jeong, watching all of this from the sidelines, stared in terror as Dova's head got yanked off her neck. It all happened so fast that he didn't even have time to react. Even as the blonde head flew, he still couldn't believe what was happening. However, the warm crimson blood gushing from her hollow neck was proof enough that he wasn't dreaming. This shit was real, and he was really in it. In a span of minutes, he'd lost 2 whole baddies, and honestly, he couldn't help but wonder which bitch broke the author's heart because this was some bullshit. Enraged, he charged at the fishman, murder clearly on his mind. Dwayne was also in the fray, instantly closing the distance between himself and the fiend. Consumed by rage, he landed a brutal punch on the fishman's flank, forcing the bastard to wince in pain. This tough motherfucker, however, tanked the hit, swiftly turning to launch its counterattack on Dwayne. The gentle giant, caught off guard by the sudden counter, froze as the fist tore toward him, a second too late to respond. Jeong, finally joining the fray, kicked the bastard's hand away, narrowly saving Dwayne from his untimely demise. Acting quickly, he performed a spin slash, cleaving for the fishman's neck. This attack, however, was easily blocked, failing to cut through the fishman's tough skin. Our boy, taken aback by this, failed to react as the fishman countered with a left jab, aimed straight for his head. Dwayne, returning the favor, landed a brutal stomp kick on the fishman, throwing the bastard off balance. Using this momentary distraction, Jeong immediately dodged the savage blow, barely clinging to his life. Realizing its attack had failed, the fishman instantly charged a double punch, sending the duo reeling with the blow. Our Chads, though overwhelmed by the onslaught, used the chance to distance themselves from the fishman. Since they knew nothing about it, insisting on melee combat was a bona fide stupid way to move. Now free from the fishy clutches, Jeong immediately cautioned Dwayne. If he had any defensive skills, he should immediately use them. He shouldn't think about facing the fiend unprepared. Dwayne, however, was too enraged to think clearly. The only thing he could focus on was the dead baddies, and the fact that the bastard who killed them was standing right in front of them. As if sensing his rage, the fishman taunted Dwayne, telling him to come at him. It'd be more than glad to reunite him with his beloved wenches if he so desired. Jeong, noticing the subtle twitching in Dwayne's face, immediately jumped in. He told the Chad to stay cool. If he lost his composure and ended up falling for the taunt, then it'd be the biggest L in history. As much as he understood how he was feeling, the mommies were now gone. Nothing they did could bring them back. If he could keep his calm, then he'd help him get revenge for the girls, and afterward they'd track down the goddamn author of this manhwa, because that motherfucker needs a good beating. Feeling his rage subside, Dwayne finally regained his rationale. Addressing Jeong, he asked him what they should do. Jeong replied that it was time to dance. Whatever moves he could pull, now was the time to go all out. With that, the duo charged forward, engaging the fishman in a bloody tango. The fishman, as if its existence wasn't a cheat enough, hit the boys with an ass-pull move, shooting out its arms like it was Luffy or something. Caught off guard by the sudden attack, Jeong barely deflected the blow. Dwayne, however, wasn't as lucky. The claw attack landed, digging deep into his gut. Upon Jeong's worried shout, Dwayne told him to push forward. He'd save himself somehow. Our boy, trusting in the giant unit, resumed his charge, barely parrying another claw attack. After finally closing the distance, he launched a jump attack, frying the fishman's head with his electric shock. The fishman, however, still had more moves up its sleeves. Pursing its lips, it blew Jeong a wet kiss, aiming straight for the Chad's face. Our boy, in a no-homo move, narrowly dodged the wet surprise, saving his head and reputation in the process. Turns out the wet kiss was actually a lethal water blast, powerful enough to leave a hole in a tree. If he coupled that with the fishman's unfair regeneration and physical buffs, it was clear this wasn't the same elderly fishman he was used to fighting in the death game. L.A.G had once again pulled out another fuck you curveball for him, and all he could do was take it. That being said, he decided not to rely on his knowledge for this fight. He'd rather concentrate and heighten his senses. That way, he'd be able to respond to whatever shit the fishy bastard had in store for them. With that in mind, Jeong ducked below the fishman's next punch, hoping to create an opening for a counterattack. To his shock, the blow suddenly stopped midway, as if it had met an immovable force. Turning around, he realized that it was the Chad Dwayne who'd held the fiend down for him, creating a perfect opening for a counter. Not one to squander opportunities, our boy immediately closed the gap, slashing furiously for the fishman's neck. The bastard, realizing its dangerous position, yanked at Dwayne, seeking to free itself. The unit, however, wasn't going to let it escape. After all the mommies it took away from him, did it really think it could escape so easily? Noticing it wasn't going anywhere with Dwayne, the fiend turned its attention to Jeong, pelting him with 3 wet kisses. Our boy, still under the protection of the no-homo, gladly soaked in those wet kisses. So what if he'd have to explain himself after this? As the Emperor once said, the taste of a demoness ain't bad. With that, he slashed at the fishman, digging deep into its arm. He'd hoped to get its neck, but unfortunately, the wet shots had made him miss his mark. However, this was still good enough. Channeling his ultra instinct, he doubled his attack, slashing through the fishman's arm. The monkey, fish, and leopard ugly bastard bellowed in pain, drenching the forest floor with its putrid blood. In its pain and anguish, it didn't forget to counterattack. Rather, it landed a vicious Spartan kick on Jeong, sending our boy flying like a rag doll. With Jeong's pathetic crash, it turned its attention to Dwayne, yeeting the giant unit straight into a tree. Our boys, left dazed by the sudden onslaught, cursed the fiendish bastard. It wasn't fair to open such a huge can of whoop-ass. At the very least, it could have eased them into it. Well, it's not like they could do anything about it now. They might as well get active. Turning to Dwayne, Jeong worriedly asked him how he was doing. The giant Chad replied that he was all right, even though that was clearly a lie. He didn't have the cheat passive skills Jeong had, which meant he was braving the damage on his own. Sure, he could hold on for a bit, but if the battle wasn't ended quickly, he'd definitely succumb to his wounds, especially the nasty bastard in his abdomen. With that in mind, Jeong locked all the fuck in, resolute not to lose another squad member today. Our boy, however, wasn't the only one making moves. The fishman was also cooking. Using the power of Ugly, the fiend began regenerating its lost limb, a task that was both painful and bloody. Jeong, catching on to its intention, immediately made his move. Like hell, he'd let the bastard regenerate, not after everything it had cost him. Charging forward, the duo made a beeline for the fishman, their demeanor screaming murder. Before they could get there, however, a shot rang out, sniping the shit out of the fishman and consequently thwarting its regeneration plans. The MC, initially taken aback, flashed a sardonic smirk. It served the fucker right to get his shit blown up like that. In fact, if the mysterious sniper could keep at it, he'd gift them a baddie. Well, not now, obviously, since he was without bitches. But he'd work on it. Taking advantage of the opening, Jeong doubled his charge, closing the gap with the fishman. Arriving before the fiend, he leveraged his momentum, driving his blade deep into its flank. The fishman, enraged by the stab, immediately countered, swiping its claws at Jeong. Our boy, having expected this attack, called out to Dwayne, instructing him to fuck shit up. Dwayne didn't disappoint. He spawned the fuck up and unleashed a powerful Superman punch, sending the fishman reeling. Carried by momentum, the gentle Chad crashed behind the fishman, skidding for a while before stopping. Jeong, capitalizing on this opening, stabbed even deeper, cleaving a nasty wound on the fishman's chest. Its blood squirted in the wake of the attack, and the fishman bellowed in pain, ultimately collapsing due to blood loss. However, the stubborn motherfucker still refused to die. Even as it bled out, it desperately activated its regeneration ability, trying to save itself. Obviously, Jeong wouldn't let that happen. Performing a jump attack, he lunged at the foe, digging his blade deep into its neck. Doubling down, our boy channeled his Thor-type shit, electrocuting the hell out of the fishman, making sure to burst its eyes and fiendish brain in the process. After an intense and savage shock therapy, the fishy bastard finally croaked, gifting Jeong his well-deserved loot. Dwayne, watching all of this from the sidelines, softly heaved a sigh of relief. Finally, the menace was gone, and they could rest. Addressing Jeong, Dwayne asked what the next plan was. Jeong replied that he should first heal his wounds. It'd be laughable if he survived that hellish fight only to die from blood loss. After that, they'd collect the souls and, most importantly, give the fallen mommies a proper funeral. With the plans set, the duo immediately set to action, their mood somber. As he collected the souls, Jeong inevitably arrived at the Chadlets' corpses. It would be a lie to say he wasn't sad about it, but after Garcia's death, he'd learned to close his heart to such things. This was L.A.G. Death was the only thing promised to them in this hell. During his journey, he was bound to meet a lot of people and lose even more. As sad as it was, that was the card life dealt him, and all he could do was play it. So, though reluctant, he would keep pushing forward. Maybe at the end of it all, it would mean something, and his suffering and losses wouldn't be for nothing. Right now, however, all he could do was keep the hope in his heart and continue fighting his fate. Done with his inner thoughts, he turned to face an inconspicuous tree, inviting the bastard hiding behind it to show himself. The bastard, who the squad had no idea was actually Liam, casually revealed himself, praising Jeong for noticing his presence. Still donning his cocky grin, the fucker asked Jeong how they were doing. Predictably, upon noticing it was actually the asshole Liam, the squad lost their shit. Jeong in particular saw red, and a murderous aura radiated from him. Before he could charge at the fool, the system notification sounded, bringing with it news of the mission. It stated that the room's mission had been half completed. They'd managed to eliminate the room's occupants and contribute the necessary percentage to be rewarded. As such, the rewards would be distributed as previously announced. They each received a random equipment coin and 20 souls. The coin came with an additional tag, warning them of the upcoming danger. It stated that just like they'd extinguished other people's embers of life and used them to fuel their own flames, someone would aim for their embers, seeking to extinguish them as well. Which honestly is ominous as fuck. But I digress. Back to the bastard Liam. The cocky fellow, in a shocking twist, asked the squad to team up with him. Jeong, however, told him to shut his hole, reminding him of the promise he'd made. Didn't he tell him he'd kill him the next time he saw his ugly, stupid, and fucked up face? Well, he meant that shit. Liam, visibly sweating, told the squad to hold up. They could always talk about it. Jeong, drawing his bone blade, told the fucker the time for talking was over. Ever since he'd killed Anji, his life was never his own. It was always Jeong's. He just didn't know it. Liam, still pleading his case, reminded them of the room's contribution percentage. As they saw, he'd done a lot to help them out. While they were fighting the fishman, he was in the background, mopping up the remaining mobs. Jeong, still fuming, didn't fall for his bullshit. He let Liam know that he'd done all that for his own survival. It wasn't a charity for them. And besides, he shouldn't think he didn't know the elderly fishman was his doing. Because of that scheme, 2 of his baddies were dead. an act he would never forgive. Liam, cursing his luck, swiftly entered a battle stance. Inwardly, he regretted not killing Jeong earlier. If he'd known this would happen, he wouldn't have been greedy, and instead killed him on the spot. Our boy, seemingly reading through his foolish thoughts, told the bastard to prepare himself. No matter what he said or did, he'd be dying there today. Oh, and just so he knew, his death would be the most brutal and fucked up one yet. Guaranteed by him, of course. We kick things off with a mad dash through the grim forest. One silhouette is frantically being pursued by two vengeful phantoms, and predictably, the bastard being hunted is the asshole Liam. After his downright loathsome deeds, it seems karma has finally caught up to his hairy ass, and now the shadow of death looms over him. The hateful fucker, true to his cockroach nature, refused to go down so easily. He paused in his pathetic retreat and launched a counterattack on our boys, pelting them with the finger rifle skill. Our Chads, however, were Gs. They easily evaded or tanked the hits, finding no challenge in the pitiful attack. Liam, noticing this, cursed his luck. To think these bastards would push him this far. Well, since it had come to this, he had no choice but to use his trump card. Thinking so, the baboon motherfucker made a beeline out of the forest, heading for the sea in the distance. Upon reaching the shore, he immediately took a fighting stance, resuming his fingering of the boys. Wait, hold up. That doesn't sound right. Let's try that again. He immediately resumed his finger bang on the goddammit. Anyway, he attacked, and our boys dodged, splitting up to divide his attention. For a ranged fighter like himself, such a tactic was particularly effective, as the hateful fool couldn't aim and fire at both of them simultaneously. Our boys, also aware of this, capitalized on the weakness, patiently biding their time for their own counterattack. However, the duo had severely underestimated the wickedness of Liam. Even cornered, the hateful foe was still scheming, deliberately luring them into a trap. And so, to Jeong's surprise, a green silhouette jumped out of the water, catching him completely off guard. What was more surprising was that the ghostly silhouette was someone we already knew, the ponytail Chad, Pauline Nordine. Turns out the Absi Chad had died at some point, morphing into a water ghost. Jeong, taken aback by the strange development, blanked out for a moment. Just what was the French Chad doing there? And was this why the hateful Liam had lured them to this place? The whole situation was so bizarre and confusing to him that even the system notification congratulating them for finding the water ghost was completely ignored. The water ghost, however, wasn't held back by such trivial matters. It immediately clocked our boy, sending him reeling. Jeong, with a grim expression, marveled at the water ghost's absurd strength and speed. If it wasn't for his passive skills, that casual blow would have blown off his arms. Borrowing the momentum, he backpedaled, putting distance between himself and the fiend. Now free from the ghostly clutches, he analyzed the situation. He didn't know how Pauline had morphed into a water ghost, but because of that, they were definitely cooked. Especially since they still had the fucker Liam to worry about. Speaking of the loathsome fool, he finally sighed in relief upon seeing the ghost materialize. Even though the new boss was quite troublesome and had even forced him to retreat pathetically the last time they fought, to him, this was still a favorable outcome. So what if the monster clapped them all? It was still better than being hunted by them. Sometimes the best way to survive was to watch everyone else burn. Flashing Dwayne a cocky smile, he wished the Chad good luck in the upcoming battle. Oh, and just in case he was curious, it was indeed him who led to Pauline's current state. Of course, it wasn't intentional. He'd been scheming and backstabbing. You know, the huge. When the Chad suddenly turned into a water ghost. Turns out killing someone by the sea leads to them morphing into a water ghost. An oversight that almost cost him his life. Anyway, he'd done all that to get Pauline's souls, but because of the sudden transformation, he was forced to escape pathetically. Dwayne, hearing the asshole's rambling, immediately exploded in rage. Even at this point, this Liam bastard continued to surprise him with his trashiness. If he couldn't end this scum of a human, then he'd have no right to call himself the Unit Dwayne. Thinking so, Dwayne leveled up his strength buff skill to level 20. When he did, the skill underwent a bizarre transformation, evolving into the superior grade power of a beast skill. The skill did exactly what the name suggested, granting the wielder the physical abilities of a wild beast. With the new skill in tow, Dwayne lunged at Liam, appearing before the fool in seconds. Liam, stunned by the absurd speed, froze for a second, failing to guard against Dwayne's punch. The hit landed so savagely that Liam's body curved in before being flung into the air. Coughing up a mouthful of blood, Liam's eyes widened in shock. To think the Chad was that powerful. If he didn't immediately lock in, he might very well die here. Thinking so, he aimed at Dwayne, firing a barrage of finger bullets at him. Our boy, however, tanked all the hits, resolutely closing the gap between them. When he finally reached him, he clocked the hateful fucker, sending the fool crashing into the sandy shore. Dwayne, however, didn't escape scot-free. Turns out, in that brief moment of impact, Liam had used a secret technique, inflicting severe damage on him. Although he didn't know exactly what he'd done, the blow was deep enough to mess up his innards. Liam, finally recovering from the onslaught, sighed regretfully. He'd wanted to stab Dwayne's vitals with that blow, but alas, things didn't work out. However, because of that, he'd learned an interesting fact about Dwayne. The Chad had absurd strength skills, but none of them particularly protected his body. That is to say, if he could avoid his gorilla-like strength, then he should be able to inflict decent damage with his nail hook. Speaking of the nail hook, this was a skill that allowed the user to extend their nails and use them as hooks. Jeong, finally remembering he was the MC of this manhwa, spawned in real quick to give some exposition. He warned Dwayne about Liam's regeneration ability, the same cheat-like ability he had. If he was to fight the slimy fiend, he had to be wary of that. With that said, he immediately skedaddled, disappearing to who knows where. The gentle Chad was left pondering the matter. Not only did Liam have a regeneration ability, but he also had a shit ton of potions. Couple that with the obvious trump cards he was hiding, and it was apparent, underestimating him was a one-way ticket to the afterlife. However, the fool wasn't all-powerful. He was at least sure his last hit did a number on him, and if he could press the attack, then avenging the mommies was a possibility. Liam, now all juiced up and fully recovered, challenged Dwayne to a second round. He was particularly interested in paying Dwayne back for that nasty punch earlier. Dwayne, not one to back down in the face of treacherous assholes, immediately pressed the attack. So what if the bastard had insane regeneration and trump cards? All he had to do was create an opening and pummel him to the ground. With that, he lunged forward, blocking and tanking all the finger bullets aimed at him. Liam, still feeling cocky, mocked the giant Chad, calling him foolish for charging at him so openly. Maybe before he could have been caught lacking, but now he was already familiar with his speed. So what could he possibly do? Dwayne, however, didn't reply. He simply entered a punching stance, cocking his arm back. Before Liam could react, he immediately punched the sandy shore, kicking up a huge sand cloud. Liam, taken aback by the odd development, chuckled haughtily at the pathetic stunt. Did Dwayne really think he'd be tricked by something this obvious? No matter what he did next, his moves were predictable. He'd either appear from the right or the left. Either way, when he showed up, he'd have a nasty surprise waiting for him. Smiling grimly, he urged Dwayne to show himself. He'd be sure to kill him this time. Dwayne, however, didn't show himself. He stayed hidden behind the huge curtain of sand. I don't know what kind of fucked up gravity lag has, but this sand cloud sure is taking its time to fall. Liam, equally puzzled by the lagging sand, shouted at Dwayne to show himself, calling him a bitch for hiding. Obviously, Dwayne didn't fall for such petty taunts, and besides, Liam had no right to call anyone a bitch, seeing as he had a mega bitch slap plastered across his face. Like damn, just how hard did Dwayne hit the bastard? Speaking of the gentle Chad, a shadowy phantom suddenly streaked on the right side, hinting at his inevitable counterattack. Liam, noticing this, immediately aimed at the phantom, ready to shoot. However, this turned out to be nothing but a feint. The giant Chad was actually attacking from the left. Liam, having expected this, smiled deviously. He quickly unloaded 2 hot ones on the silhouette, punching holes through the sand curtain. To his shock, this too was a feint. The giant Chad didn't attack from either direction. Instead, he blitzed through the middle, drop-kicking the living shit out of Liam. The blow sent the bastard reeling, causing him to crash pitifully into the hard ground. Despite his grave injuries, our boy didn't let up. He swiftly closed in, preparing another stomp attack on the hateful fellow. Normally, he wouldn't be doing this, but for Liam, this loathsome fucker, he was ready to make an exception. Saying so, Dwayne landed a vicious stomp kick on Liam's knee, causing the bastard to wail in agony. As satisfying as this was to see, it was also such a shame. I mean, his balls were right there. Why didn't he stomp on them fuckers instead? Anyway, I digress. Liam, enraged and in pain, launched his counterattack, pelting Dwayne with a barrage of finger bullets. Our boy, however, easily shrugged off the blows. What were a couple of puny bullets to his Chadley physique? Rather, he held onto Liam's treacherous hand, breaking it like a twig. As he'd said before, it really wasn't in his nature to torture someone, but for some strange reason, Liam's scream sounded like music in his ears. The bastard, clearly frantic, swung at Dwayne, his ghostly claws aiming for his face. Caught off guard by the insidious attack, Dwayne fumbled, barely sacrificing his hand to block the blow. Before he could launch his Chadley counter, probably involving the Wayne Brady principle, the scene switched to Jeong, showcasing his battle with the water ghost. Seems like the author finally remembered who was the top dog in his manhwa and decided to give our boy some screen time. However, currently, Jeong's chattiness was not chattying since he was losing pathetically to the water ghost. Despite his savage slashes, the fiend was eating them like candy, finding no challenge in the blows. Jeong, fed up with the stalemate, blitzed the ghost, sending it flying into the distance. He didn't know what the resilient bastard was made of, but surely with its neck broken, it would be dead, right? Nope. Lag was like, fuck that. This wasn't the place to defeat enemies with wishful thinking and the power of friendship. He could save that bullshit for Naruto. In here, people fought like men, desperate and bloody. And so, to Jeong's surprise, the ghostly fucker got back up, fixing its broken neck like it was nothing. Our boy, cursing his shitty luck, scowled at the fiend, rage evident on his face. He wondered why the ghost had such absurd resilience, high enough to shrug off broken necks. Even if it was lag, this was getting ridiculous. Anyway, seems the best way forward was to chop off its neck or mince it to pieces. Only then would its death be assured. However, that was easier said than done, since his bone blade couldn't even scratch it. Not to mention, the ghost wasn't the only foe he had to worry about. There was still Liam in the equation. But he couldn't afford to be bothered by him right now. The situation had developed to a state where any carelessness from them would get them instantly killed. So, as much as he wanted to drag that loathsome fool into the fray and use him as a meat shield, he couldn't do so. All he could do was trust in Dwayne to handle him and trust in himself to solo the water ghost. As if it had sensed Jeong's resolve, the ghost roared, its voice bellowing out like sound waves. Jeong, identifying this as the signal to lock the fuck in, immediately entered a fighting stance. He quickly deduced that his current strength alone wouldn't be enough to defeat the foe. If he wanted to do that, then significant upgrades had to be made. And so, with that in mind, our boy burned through his souls, leveling up his swordsmanship, pain relief, lizard tail, and tough skin skills to levels 10, 5, 3, and 7, respectively. With that done, Jeong braced for impact, tanking the ghost's lunge attack with strained ease. Acting quickly, he immediately countered, landing a vicious kick on its flank. For any living being, this could have been considered an effective attack, one aimed to immobilize the enemy through pain. However, since the water ghost didn't feel pain, nor did it fear it, the attack ended up amounting to dog shit. Jeong, noticing this, immediately switched to the next ace up his sleeve, lightning shock. Channeling his Thor-type shit, he bathed the ghost in brilliant lightning, knocking it back. And I don't know if it's just me, but somehow the water ghost looks hella zesty in this scene. Or maybe it's hitting the nay-nay, who knows. Anyway, the blow from the attack sent it backpedaling, allowing Jeong a well-deserved reprieve. Analyzing the foe, he noticed that electric attacks didn't work on it either. So far, he'd managed to do 0 damage to it, and if that continued, he'd find himself in a troublesome situation. Desperate and cornered, he contemplated using the Door of Limitation skill but swiftly shot it down. He had no idea what the fallout would be for using the skill. If it turned out to be a massive depletion of his stamina, then he'd truly be fucked. Finding it wise to play it safe, he instead leveled up his strong bones and calm breathing skills. With the 2 skills, he could enhance the power of his bone blade and also decrease the stamina consumption when using said skill. Though not nearly as effective as he'd liked, this was all he could do for now. As he charged at the ghost, Jeong reflected on the actions he should take. Methodical thinking and planning wouldn't work on such a foe. What he needed was something else. Something primal. He had to move instinctively, use unconventional methods to throw it off. And although it might sound flashy when he said it like that, what the bastard actually meant was that he'd be fighting hella dirty in this fight. Acting on this, Jeong threw sand into the ghost's eyes, temporarily blinding it. He capitalized on this opening, spawning behind the fiend, his bone blade at the ready. Even if it was sturdy, He wanted to see if it could still fight back after getting decapitated. With this thought, he decisively swung at the ghost, offering a gentle prayer for Pauline to finally rest in peace. This prayer, however, was bitch-slapped away by Lag when Pauline briskly raised his arm, using it to block the incoming slash. Channeling its horror-type shit, the ghost leaned back, scaring the shit out of our boy. Before he could react, the ghost countered, landing a back kick on his ass, forcing him to cough up a mouthful of blood. Jeong, now backpedaling from the blow, cursed his shitty luck. Even while fighting dirty, this bastard still refused to die. Not only that, but his bone blade upgrades turned out to be straight trash. Well, since it had come to this, he had no choice but to go hard. If long and narrow won't do it, then he'd have to go with short and girthy. Pause. In this state, he was sure he'd be able to do a number on the resilient fucker, especially if he aimed at the neck it had been instinctively protecting. As Jeong was still organizing his big-brain plots destined to be bitch-slapped by the water ghost, the fiend in question was making some bizarre moves. Crouching down, it lunged at our boy, its arm performing a strange clawing motion. When it did so, a ghostly black aura enveloped its hand, causing alarm bells to go off in Jeong's mind. Although he didn't know what the hell it was, his spidey senses were tingling, warning him of the impending fucktitude. And true to his instincts, the ghost clawed forward, hurling a black beam of death towards him. Jeong, overwhelmed by primal fear, stared gravely at the attack. He didn't know what bullshit hole the ghost pulled this move from, but one thing was for certain. This was the closest he'd ever come to death since his regression. Not only was the attack ridiculously fast, making dodging impossible, but also bizarrely threatening, as if death was inevitable once hit by it. As things stood, his chatty ass might very well ascend to heaven after this blow. Before the attack could land and effectively kickstart an epic reunion with Garcia Mommy, we switched scenes to the bloody battle with Dwayne. The Chad, having narrowly blocked the lethal blow, clasped Liam's hand, yanking his bleeding arm from his ghastly claws. Applying pressure, he warned the bastard not to have any foolish fantasies of dying easily. He was to suffer so much that death would feel like paradise to him. Saying so, Dwayne pulled and twisted, breaking Liam's arm like a bloody twig. Overwhelming pain assaulted Liam, driving him to the brink of insanity. He shouted at Dwayne, promising to kill him in the most agonizing way possible. Dwayne, however, ignored the fool. He told him to shut his hole. If it wasn't for the possibility that he would turn into a water ghost after dying, then he would have long killed his hateful ass. That being said, just because he couldn't kill him didn't mean he couldn't make him wish he was dead instead. Saying so, Dwayne clocked the shit out of Liam, feeding the loathsome fucker a black knuckle sandwich. Dust clouds blew from the attack, and Liam, the loving recipient of this generous meal, had his face completely rearranged. Never had I ever thought I'd get this much satisfaction from watching a bastard bleed. But honestly, I believe I'm not the only one. Most of you are probably feeling the same way. And judging by Dwayne's expression, our boy is equally ecstatic. We switch scenes back to Jeong. Our boy, unlike us, was currently shitting his pants. Forget joy. He was instead in the deepest pits of hell, with the Grim Reaper gently pecking on his lips. No matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't find a feasible solution to his current predicament. All his skills and equipment were useless, and the only choice left was to somehow tank it and pray for the best. As he was still resigning himself to fate, a Chad in shiny armor came along, saving his doomed ass from death. Dwayne, with his power of a beast skill, roared at the claw attack, eating away at its absurd power. Jeong, capitalizing on this weakness, slashed apart the death beam, barely clinging to his life in that desperate moment. The ghost, however, wasn't done with its offensive. It immediately pressed the attack, lunging decisively at our boy. Caught off guard by the relentless barrage, Jeong tanked a punch from the water ghost, causing his innards to tremble violently. Dwayne, jumping back in, clocked the ghost, sending it reeling into the distance. With that assist, Jeong finally got a breather, which he used to settle his chaotic state. Done with the adjustments, our boys immediately pressed the attack, leaving no room for the ghost to adapt. Performing a jump attack, Jeong slashed off the ghost's hand, bathing his short sword with its blood. Dwayne, not to be outdone, charged back in, landing a brutal low kick on the fiend's leg. The fiend, however, was done playing punching bag. It countered Dwayne's blow, connecting a double punch to his chest. Jeong, capitalizing on the opening from its wild swing, lunged back in, his bone blade screaming murder. On the other end, Dwayne also pressed forward, effectively trapping the ghost in a pincer attack. Finding itself caught between two giants, the ghost had no choice but to abandon protecting its neck and face both sides simultaneously. Our boy, noticing this, smirked widely. This was the chance he'd been waiting for. With the ghost unable to protect its neck, this was the best moment to slash off its hateful head. And so, with that thought, Jeong pressed forward, nimbly dodging the ghost's counterattack. Borrowing from his swing momentum, he delivered a nasty slash to the fiend's neck, hoping to decapitate the fool. However, the boss's neck turned out to be hella sturdy, forcefully blocking the sword slash. At that critical moment, Dwayne spawned the fuck in, connecting a savage punch to the ghost's face. Under Dwayne and Jeong's collective attacks, the fiend finally succumbed, losing its head in glorious fashion. With that, the battle ended, and the Chad Pauline was finally freed from his torturous fate. Jeong, recalling he still had another asshole to handle, asked Dwayne about Liam. The gentle Chad told him not to worry. Considering the state Liam was in, he was practically dead. In fact, there was no need to tell him. He could see for himself. However, when he turned around to show Jeong, the bastard Liam was nowhere to be seen. Dwayne, visibly shocked, quickly ran to the bloody shore, wondering where the cockroach motherfucker had gone. Even in that state, had that hateful bastard really escaped? The MC, analyzing the blood trails, deduced that Liam must have escaped into the sea, a fact that made tracking him insanely difficult. Dwayne, however, was adamant. He insisted on chasing down Liam. With his injured state, he couldn't have gone far. Jeong immediately brushed off the idea, instead focusing on something else. He asked Dwayne if there was a possibility Liam would turn into a water ghost if he died in the sea. Dwayne replied that he wasn't sure. Even if the bastard drowned, the system might treat it as his technical kill, so there was no way to tell. All they could do was hope for the best. Jeong agreed, though inwardly, he was hella skeptical. This was L.A.G. Wishful thinking never ended well in that hell. So before shit hit the fan, which it inevitably would, he told Dwayne to bounce. They were leaving that bitch.